It's interesting, that point, because what you're known for, and I remember you from my undergraduate psychology degree, is something called the Flynn effect.
That's right. And I've always cautioned people against thinking that the Flynn effect settles the race and IQ debate, although, of course, it's used as a club to do that. I've always said, yes, it takes us a part of the way. It shows that environment can really have a great deal of effect on IQ, setting genes aside. But you still have to make a detailed case that the environmental gap that separates white and black in America today is analogous to the gap that separates the generations. You know, it doesn't let you off the hook.
Well, I guess to explain the gap is that the idea, as far as I've read, is that each successive generation, and this is across several different Western countries and on various different types of IQ tests, such as the Wechsler Intelligence Scale and the Stanford-Binet, will increase.
And of course, the Ravens. Too.
And the Ravens matrices, which is generally considered to be less culturally biased.
Culturally reduced, when in point of fact, thanks to my research, it's now realized that it's not culturally reduced at all. Something I would never have discovered if I hadn't started arguing with Jensen.
So I guess the importance is that you develop that knowledge. This is what happened for me when I heard the original debate between Charles Murray and Sam Harris. Not the debate, but the interview. Sam Harris is a new atheist who interviewed Charles Murray, and it created a great furor.
Why was that? Why did...
Well, because Charles Murray has been shunned, essentially, in a lot of circles, particularly within universities. I mean, that's what your book is about, to some extent.
It's a great pity, because he's a very serious scholar that you can learn from. That doesn't mean I agree with him. I've rarely seen a work by Charles Murray that you couldn't learn from.
So I suppose the point was that when I heard it, my immediate reaction was Murray doesn't understand the Flynn effect, when in fact I found out that Murray named the Flynn effect.
He coined the term Flynn effect, which was a good boon to me. It opened doors for me that otherwise wouldn't have been open. But he quite rightly said, you know, that the mere fact that over 100 years we have made enormous environmental progress and may have raised average IQ by 30 points doesn't mean that at a given time and place those same environmental differences separate black and white. And of course, Jensen made what seemed to be a powerful point. You still run into people who don't even realize this, that when you equate black and white today, for socioeconomic status, it doesn't eliminate the IQ gap. And even worse, because that's far more important, it doesn't eliminate the educational achievement gap. And to answer that question, you have to undertake a very searching inquiry into the limits of socioeconomic status and the nature of black subculture. And even if the race and IQ didn't exist, you learn an awful lot from doing that. You know, look, everyone who can read history with an unbiased eye and isn't full of either right-wing or left-wing nonsense knows that in America, that a Chinese of a certain socioeconomic status, equated with an Irishman of socioeconomic status, set up a far more educationally efficient home. You know, you don't, when you walk into an Irish restaurant, see an Irish kid asleep over his books and wakes up and goes on reading the next passage. He's likely to be out playing sport. And when you enter a Jewish home, it's quite different than entering a Polish home. These groups are separated by important cultural differences that have a transcendence of socioeconomic status. And today it's respectable to say, oh, it's all SES. But then you can say you can't blame blacks for being poor. That lets them off the hook. Well, if you give an intelligent attempt to show that subculture is important, you're accused of blaming the victim. You're saying black culture is to blame that blacks aren't more educationally achieving. To think that anyone is to blame for the history of their ethnic group is insane. I mean, I'm not to blame for the fact that when the Irish came to America, they had never picked up farming skills and were let loose in alien cities, that they had a history of violence, that many people's highest aspiration was to be the best street fighter on the block. It wasn't necessarily getting an A+ in mathematics. Am I supposed to be blamed for how the Irish were treated in England and the unfortunate made on them in America.
I guess I think that socioeconomic status doesn't capture it. It doesn't capture, as you're talking about, historical things like during slavery, black people considered to be 3/4 human under the Constitution. Post-slavery, black lives essentially being criminalised, that you could be imprisoned for looking at a white woman the wrong way and imprisoned for that.
When you look at black women, as I've said in my material, which I would never have developed if I hadn't been arguing with people like Jensen and Lynn, and I say in there, of course, a black kid from an upper middle class home will have an advantage over a black kid from a home where everyone is high on some type of narcotic.
Yes.
No doubt. But they're even setting socioeconomic status aside. You remember my use of Elsie Moore's study. He was the one who looked at black children, all of whom were adopted by either white or black professional parents.
Yes, and there was a change in the reduction in the gap. It was increased by 13 points.
Even though the mothers had 16 years of education, the black and white mothers, even though the fathers were all professionals or semi-professionals, by the age of 8.5, the black kids adopted by the white professional parents were 13 IQ points above. Well, that hasn't got to do with race. No one sorted them by race before adoption or by genes. And when she called the mothers in, you remember the white mothers were universally encouraging, saying, that's a good idea, let's try this. The black mothers were universally censorious. You're not that dumb. You can do better than that. And it turned out that the white professional mothers had a much more positive attitude to problem solving than the black professional mothers did. And you remember I was the first one to analyze Eysink's data.
Hans Eysenck, the psychologist.
Yes, that's right. The half-black kids in Germany during the occupation of Germany. And they did as well as white kids left behind by American servicemen. What was the difference? There was no black subculture in Germany. They were just dark-skinned, acculturated Germans. They faced prejudice, but they didn't face the subculture, which differs widely between groups in terms of encouraging cognitive performance.